today with us we have Gary Hamel, well known for a lot of books, and the latest Humanocracy is really great. Highly recommend it. And it's very much about new management. Well, Gary, in your work, you argue against bureaucracy. For instance, you have pointed out the paradox where individuals are trusted to make major personal investments, like purchasing a home, but not when they are at the office. They need the manager's approval just to buy something cheap. I could argue that bureaucracy stems from the fear of losing control, particularly over finance resources. How can we design a system that provides high levels of autonomy while ensuring that resources are not misused?
That's a great question, Thomas. First of all, I think you have to realize that bureaucracy was created about 150 years ago at a time when most employees were illiterate, when information was very difficult to move, and the best way of moving information was to have a hierarchy where 10 people would report up to a manager who would consolidate that information and report it up the chain of command. And it was also a world in which change was relatively well behaved. Well, that world doesn't exist anymore. And so the challenge is, if you want to build an organization that is resilient and innovative, you have to give people more authority and more power. Now, obviously, there's a risk there. People are nervous when you say you have to dramatically expand the decision rights of those on the front lines. There's a certain degree of nervousness, like, well, what happens if they screw up? Or what happens if we can't trust them? But I think the answer to that is not that difficult. If you want to empower people, one, you have to train them, teach them to think like business people so you can trust them with significant decisions. Number two, you want to give them a financial upside so they really are incentivized to make smart decisions, and they benefit when those decisions work out. Number three, you have to give them context so they understand, the surroundings of the business, who the competitors are, who our customers are, and so on. So, in a way, I don't think anybody really wants to be managed. And yet, we have these ranks and ranks of managers because we haven't given people that business literacy. We haven't given them a proper upside. We haven't given them the information and the context they need to make smart decisions. Well, those are all things we can change. And when you do it, you find there's an extraordinary amount of initiative and ingenuity in an organization that has long gone unexploited. People will rise to the challenge. And we've seen this in organization after organization. But you're right. One of the first steps is leaders have to recognize that we are really not in control. And in a complex world, we can't be in control. So we really have to trust others and equip others to make decisions in real time close to customers.
Yeah, thank you very much. You also advocated for a new approach of management for nearly 3 decades. Are we now seeing the emergence of this new management paradigm?
There's certainly more companies, more organizations now that I would say are kind of post-bureaucratic, that are part of that vanguard than perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. Bureaucracy as a social system is very deeply embedded. Most organizations around the world are more alike than they are different. Power trickles down, big leaders appoint little leaders, strategy is set at the top. You have ranks of managers who assign tasks and assess performance, but that is beginning to change. In the same way that over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen kind of an explosion of new business models, we're now starting to see new management models. And companies like Vinci, the huge French infrastructure company, in healthcare with organizations like Buurtzorg that runs a network of 16,000 nurses with only a couple of managers. Organizations like Roche, a global pharmaceutical company that has pretty much flattened the hierarchy. So yeah, there are a lot more inspiring examples we can learn than perhaps a couple of decades ago. Having said that, we're still a long ways from really having a fundamental paradigm shift. Most leaders grew up in and around organizations that fit that old bureaucratic template. They're very comfortable there. They've learned how to win in that kind of environment. So it's going to take some more time, but I'm really optimistic that we're on the right path. And part of what makes me optimistic is when I talk to leaders and CEOs, increasingly they will admit that the real challenge for their organization is not the operating model. It's not the business model. The real challenge is the management model. We have too many layers. We're too conservative. We're too slow. We're too inwardly focused. Not all of them, I think, have the courage yet to do something about that, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
I'm happy to hear that. You are quite often mentioning like Buurtzorg, as you mentioned, and higher also. Um, in the Leading Complexity program, earlier we had speakers like Annika Staber and Bill Fisher talk about higher, and this year we are happy to have Jos de Blok as a participant or a speaker. Do you have any new suggestions for companies that are working this way? Are they popping up, or or would we
Sure,
continue
sure.
talking about those?
No, no, no. I think there's certainly a lot to learn from those organizations, but there are others that we can learn from. One of the companies I'll talk about on the program is Ingersoll Rand. This is a 100-year-old U.S. manufacturing company that was at one point put together through a private equity company, and they've rolled out a new model called shared ownership. All of the things I mentioned earlier, financial upside, business literacy, more decision-making power, all of those things they've implemented. They've seen an extraordinary growth in productivity. Every performance measure has gone up. So yeah, we're seeing new companies all the time that are moving in this direction.
That makes me really happy to hear. Great. Thank you very much for this interview, and looking forward to see you in the Leading Complexity program this fall. Thank you very much, Gary.
Yeah, my pleasure.